What is up, guys? How are we doing? Beautiful Wednesday night. Night for me, anyway. Got a late one coming at you. 9 p.m. EST. All right. So I hope everybody is having a great day so far. Great week. I know for me, nearing spring break, I got 2 days till spring break, so I'm hanging on for dear life at this point, but having a good time with it. But it's great to see you guys back here again. I know it's kind of a short distance between, or I guess short time period between the last Cram session, which was Sunday, and this one. So, short turnaround, but that's okay. Our next one is going to be next week. I honestly will have to look at the dates. Can anyone see me? You guys having trouble seeing me? Okay. Okay. Yeah, let me know if you guys are having trouble here. Hopefully we can work all these kinks out before the 5-hour Cram session, because that would be quite unfortunate. Okay, Charlie, hopefully we can get this figured out. Everybody else can see me then? Okay, cool. All right. So today we are going to be Zwingli, what's up? Old Erlich Zwingli in the chat. So today we are going to be looking at the document-based question, which is probably, this is the big bad, I remember the ominous dread that surrounded the document-based question when I was in high school. This is kind of the thing that students really get tripped up with the most, and I think for good reason. It's really weird. It's different, especially if you've never taken an AP exam before. All right, we got lots of questions. Okay, Thomas, how much information do I need to know for this exam? So I kind of gave my tips early or on Sunday about how to best study for this thing. I think generally speaking, what you want to do is you want to go back, look at all the units, and really focus on the big themes, focus on kind of that bigger content knowledge, and then start working on individual people, individual events, all that kind of stuff. I think that you're going to kill yourself if you try to study every single little detail, right? That's just so overwhelming. That's just like way too much. And you're going to really just like run yourself ragged doing that. I would really recommend kind of chunking it up. And then also you definitely have to study the exam itself, right? Which is what we're doing today. All right. Ariana, taking the first exam on May 7th. Yeah, I think that definitely, if you've just been focusing on content, I would really make sure that you start looking at exam prep, right? So practice. That's kind of one of the big keys, especially with the DBQ. It's just about practice. Yeah, speed writing is really important. Yeah, just writing fast, writing, the good thing about this exam that I think is beneficial for you guys is that College Board could really care less if you have grammatical errors. College Board could really care less if you if it's messy, as long as they can read it, right? You're not getting points taken off for misspelling, Reformation or Renaissance, right? As long as they know what you're saying, you're good. Okay. All right. So, first things first, Charlie, I'm glad you got it figured out, by the way. Before we head into talking about the DBQ, I do want to go back and kind of do a little review. Review books, I definitely recommend picking one up or two up. I think you're really probably fine with just picking up one. the content review book I really like is the Crash Course book, the Crash Course AP European History. It's just content knowledge, but it's really, really good. That is the book that when I when I teach this class like in person, that's the book I buy for all my students. Or I get the school. I don't buy it personally, but the school buys it for all the students. Because it's really, really good at cohesively covering the content knowledge. In terms of test prep, you're going to want to look at like Princeton Review. You're going to want to look at like 5 Steps to a 5. Those are all virtually the same, in my opinion, from what I found. I don't think one's necessarily better than the other. It's just whichever one, like, I guess, looks the most appealing to you is what I would recommend. But I would pick one up. I would pick up at least like a Princeton Review or a 5 Steps to a 5 for sure. For sure. And they will have lots of practice in those books, which is like what's nice about them. There has been a lot of chatter in the Discord about kind of the validity of those practice questions and prompts and stuff in those books. The reality is that they are not perfect by any means. I talked about this actually. I responded to a question in the Discord. I do think that those tend to focus really, really heavily on content knowledge and less on actual thematic stuff. Charlie, I agree. I like 5 Steps to a 5 the most out of all of them because it is very, very, it's very condensed. But they tend to focus on content knowledge. Like that is what they're testing you for. But it's in sort of the AP style, but they are not, mark for mark AP questions, right? Like they're the DBQ and the SAQ and the LAQ are gonna look different on the actual exam. So that's why I really, really recommend going and doing what we're about to do right now, actually. So if you go to, and let me share my screen with you guys. There we go. Let me also do this. Copy chat link. Get chat going. Please. All right. All right. So I really recommend more than anything else. When we're reviewing for the test, go and type in AP European History, the exam. It will take you to this page. Scroll down to the bottom. And I've said this before, so sorry for those who've heard me say this a million times. And you'll see all of the past free response questions for the last like 20 years, right? You go to past exam questions. These are from 2019. 2020s are posted on AP Classroom, which I can't give you guys access to, unfortunately. But if you click on them, it's going to take you to this. These are the released free response questions. These are the best practice that you can do, hands down. Okay, these are the best practice that you guys can do, hands down. Okay. I want to look at some short answer questions though, because this is we covered short answer questions last time. I want to talk a little bit about. So these are some short answer questions from all the way back in 2018. And this short answer question in particular really tripped up my students. This was a pretty commonly missed short answer question. And I want to see if we can look at why. So this is on the surface a very simple question, right? And this is probably, if you solve this on the AP exam, you would probably be over the moon because it's something that's really simple, right? So 3 parts, right? As all short answer questions. So describe one reason for Martin Luther's critique of the Catholic Church in the early 1500s. Describe one Catholic response in the 1500s to Luther's critique. And explain how Luther's protests contributed to social change in Europe in the periods of 1517 to 1600. So, yeah. So Thomas, absolutely. For A, you could totally talk about the litany of things that Luther critiques, right? So indulgences, for sure. You could also talk about nepotism. You could talk about just general corruption. You don't even need to get as specific. If you just say the corruption of the Catholic Church, then you're gonna get the point for A. Because short answer questions, remember, we don't need to be super specific here. We just need to answer the question. All right, what about for B? Describe one Catholic response in the 1500s to Luther's critique. What could we say for this? What could we say for part B? I will say, this part B was the part of the short answer question that tripped up the most people. Deed of Worms. Ariana, you are on the right track thinking about the Catholic Council of Trent. Here's the tricky part with part B. Here's the tricky part with part B. Part B is asking you, explain one Catholic response in the 1500s to Luther's critique. What it is not asking you is one Catholic response to Luther. It is asking you about Luther's critique. So if you were to say the Deed of Worms, or you were to say excommunication, then you would not get the point here. Because it's not asking you about how the Catholic Church dealt with Luther. It's asking you about how they dealt with Luther's critique. So you could say they redacted, or they stopped the selling of indulgences. You could say that they established seminary schools. You could say that they reaffirmed Catholic doctrine. All that stuff that happened at the Council of Trent. You cannot say and expect to get the points by saying Deed of Worms or excommunication. All right, this really is. Yeah, Catholic missions overseas, absolutely, Charlie. That's a great one. And you know, talking about how Catholicism, the Catholic Church really pushed to spread and create more Catholics, right? It's really important. This is like the best example that College Board has ever given us about why you have to read the question and read to understand. This is a question that's kind of a sleeper, right? You read it and you're like, this is easy, I got it, and you really didn't read it, right? Because you answer B by saying that he was excommunicated and you only get 2 points. Would one sentence about the affirming of Catholic doctrine earn you the point? Yep, because that's what they did. They reaffirmed Catholic doctrine, right? That was their response to the critique that only 2 of the 7 sacraments are actually like legit, right? Because remember, Luther is like the only 2 of the 7 sacraments that are legit are baptism and the Eucharist, right? And all the other ones don't really matter. They're not important. And so by the Catholic Church reaffirmed those doctrines. They reaffirmed those sacraments. So yeah, that would get you the point for sure. Then the last one, explain how Luther's protests contributed to social change in Europe in the periods of 1517 to 1600. With this one, there's a lot of stuff you can talk about. I would really recommend. Well, let me see. What would you guys say for C? What would you guys say for C before I give my 2 cents? What do you think you would say for C? Peasant revolts are good. You could talk about the peasant revolts. Yeah, Charlie, I think that this is really the best answer, is talking about the spread of literacy. Right? We know that with the spread of the Bible being, not only with the spread of the Bible being written in German and then eventually English and French and but also the encouragement to actually go out and read it, increase literacy rates, right? So the increase of literacy rates is a great social change you could talk about. You could also talk about, there's this idea of like the Protestant work ethic, how Protestantism really encouraged hard work and commitment to kind of your work ethic. You could also talk about how Lutheranism and the Protestant Reformation encouraged people to question traditional authority, which is a social change. There's a lot that you can talk about here, but this is kind of, you know, I always like to say that when you were talking about these big ideas, Renaissance, Reformation, age of exploration, absolutism, we want to know social, economic, and political, right? Social, economic, and political. Those are the three, you know, the three big things that the top kind of bigger topics and categories that you'll be asked about on the exam. Yeah, encouraging people to challenge common authority is definitely one that you could talk about. There's a lot. The biggest thing though is you want to make sure that if you with a question like this, that your point is really, that your point connects to the actual question, that you don't answer the question in a roundabout way to the point where a reader isn't going to give it to you. You know, how the printing press encouraged literacy around Europe. The big thing though is we need to tie that to the Reformation, right? Because the printing press is not tied to the Reformation, you know, directly. We know it is. That was a weird way to say it. The printing press itself is not the Reformation, right? The printing press was not a result of the Reformation. The printing press happened or was invented before the Reformation. So if you're going to say printing press encouraged literacy around Europe, that wasn't Luther's protests that did that, right? That was the printing press. So just make sure that if you're going to talk about increased literacy rates, you really tie it to the Reformation and you tie it to Luther's protests. That's the big thing, is tie it to the question, right? All right, let's go ahead and get into DBQ so we don't run out of time. All right. Cool bean. Sorry, messing with the presenter view in Google Slides. There we go. All right, let's rock and roll. All right, so this is going to be looking at the DBQ specifically, right? As always, this is being recorded. You can set your name to whatever you'd like. That's why we have an Erlich Zwingli in the chat right now. But make sure, if you don't want your name to be seen in the recorded version, change it to whatever you'd like. Okay. If you're not following Fiveable on the social medias, please do. You know, Fiveable posts some great stuff, especially on Twitter. Get out there, follow them. Follow Amanda, the founder of Fiveable. Follow your other teachers if you're taking other Fiveable or other Cram sessions. So definitely get on there, check it out, and make sure you follow them on the social medias. All right, next week, this is supposed to say LEQ, not SAQ. I'll go in and fix that. Let me actually do that right now. We are not messing up here. But next week, we are going to be... there we go. Next week, we are going to be talking about... the LEQs from the 2019 exam. We are going to ideally be looking at 3 of them. That's kind of my goal, which is pretty lofty. But I think with the LEQ, we're going to be able to pull in a lot of very similar information. Let me present from beginning here, or not present review. There we go. That's what we want. We're going to be able to pull in like a lot of very similar information from the DBQ. So I really think that we can probably get through like the nuts and bolts of the LEQ, and then get right into talking about some examples, which I would of course love to do. So this is the QR code link to the LEQs. This is just going to take you to the 2019 exam questions. You just scroll down until you actually get to the LEQs, okay? All right. So we are really winding down on the end here, folks. We have 2 more Cram sessions lined up. We have our LEQ cram session lined up 9 days from now, so quite a distance away from us. That is on the 30th. So that's going to be on Saturday, I think, like a week from Saturday. And then we have our cram finale. 5 hours that we'll be hanging out together. I will be here for all 5 hours. I'm going to be slugging coffee and slugging tea and some lots of water, and it will be a great time. Last year's was awesome. It was so much fun. It's really very laid back. We cover a lot of stuff. You guys get the opportunity to ask as many questions as you want, and it really is a very fun time. We'll be there for all 5 hours. Also, what we're gonna do, I got confirmation on this. What we're gonna be doing for you guys that are taking exams in those 2 later exams, we're gonna be doing some watch parties for the cram sessions. So I am not going to be doing another cram session. What we're going to do is we are going to be watching the replays of the cram sessions. Charlie will be in chat. I'm going to see if I can stop in for a little bit as well and hang out and answer questions. And then that way there's still kind of the cram experience, but we won't be hosting the full cram sessions again. All right, so what we're going to look at today is we're going to be looking at the DBQ, which is very intimidating, like I said. I'm going to try to break it down and make it a little bit more digestible for you guys. So we're going to be, we already reviewed we're going to review a little bit the makeup of the exam. We already reviewed short answer questions. We're going to look at what a DBQ actually is. We'll look at the rubric. Spoiler alert, the rubric for the DBQ and the LEQ are very important. We'll look at how to interpret the sources, managing your time, and then if we have some time at the end, we'll look at the practice DBQ and talk about how we would tackle it. So as a reminder, this is the setup for the exam. This is the paper exam, right? This is the paper exam. This is not your online exam. The big difference between the paper exam and the online exam is that you are going to be answering 2 extra short answer questions and no long essay question. So next week, right, when we cover the long essay question, that's for those of you guys that are taking the online version, not the paper version. If you're taking the online version, you will not have to know anything about the LEQ. So you'll be doing a DBQ and 5 short answer questions. But this is the paper version. And it seemed like there was kind of like a 50-50 split when I asked you guys who was taking what. But anyway, 55 multiple choice questions, 3 short answer questions, 1 DBQ, 1 LEQ. Okay. The terms of the time breakdown, you have 1 hour and 40 minutes to answer the DBQ and the LEQ. You have 40 minutes to answer 3 short answer questions. You have 55 minutes to answer the multiple choice. With past exams, what has happened, and I don't know why they wouldn't do this now. I can double check for sure, but I would assume that you have 1 hour and 40 minutes to do a DBQ and an LEQ. It's not timed in the way that like you have 1 hour to do the DBQ, then time stops and you have to move on to the LEQ. You have 1 hour and 40 minutes to do the DBQ and the LEQ. What that means is that you really have to manage your time. I'll talk about this more probably with the LEQs, but I really recommend tackling the easiest one first and getting it knocked out. Because if you can write the LEQ in like 20-30 minutes, you are going to be in such good shape for the DBQ, right? You'll have so much more time. I'll talk about that more with the LEQ though, but that's just something that popped into my head. All right, so what is the DBQ? This is the big baddie, right? This is the thing that like definitely scares off a lot of potential AP students. This is the thing that for a lot of AP students, they find out they have to write a DBQ in 1 hour and they're just like, nope, I'm out. That's it for me. I'm dropping out. I'm switching to another class. The reality is that the DBQ is a lot of bark and very little bite. The DBQ, once you learn how to tackle it, it's going to be something that you can really, really get a lot of good points out of. All right. So we can see the overview of the DBQ here. All right. The big takeaway here is that you're going to have a question. You're going to have 7 documents that you need to use to answer that question. So effectively what this is an argumentative research paper that you're writing in an hour, which that sounds really scary. But when you write an argumentative research paper, you gather evidence, then you use that evidence to argue your thesis. You're doing the same thing here, but they have given you your evidence, right? So you're taking that evidence that they give you and you are applying it to a short answer question, or you're applying it to a written question in a thesis. Okay. Does that make sense? Do you have any questions about that so far? Okay. So one of the things that the DBQ asks you to do is apply historical thinking skills. And the historical thinking skills are these, and these are pretty common across all of the AP history classes. These are the big ideas that College Board wants you to be able to do in an AP history class. Okay. These can be found in the course and exam description. You guys might have also seen this. Your teacher might have shown this to you towards the beginning of the year. But effectively, what this is these are the 6 big skills that the College Board wants you to have when you leave an AP history class. Okay, so things like sourcing and citations, or sourcing and situations. Excuse me. Being able to read a source and understand how you would use it in a specific argument. Claims and evidence and sources. Okay, making claims and drawing evidence. Contextualization. Okay, putting sources in context, putting history in context, understanding the context of a historical situation, making connections between larger historical themes and ideas and events, argumentation, okay, being able to argue for a point. All of these ideas are stuff that you're already doing in your AP history class. They're just kind of like written down in kind of like bulleted lists, all right? So you're going to be doing a lot of these skills in the DBQ, okay? But I wanted to show you guys this. These are the historical thinking skills. So if you see this term pop up, this is what College Board is talking about. All right, so the rubric, in my opinion, is one of the most important parts, one of the most important things for you to know in order to succeed on the DBQ. Okay, I'm going to tell you why. The DBQ is a total of 7 points that you can get. You get a total of 7 points. And your job is to get as many points as you possibly can. Get as many points as you possibly can. That is your job. That is your job. You are playing for points. Okay? That's what you got to be doing. It's a really kind of like, I don't know. I always feel weird about saying that you play for points with the DBQ, but it's exactly what you are doing. Okay? So 7 total points that are up for grabs. Some are easier to get than others. But in general, it's a numbers game. You want to try to get as many points as possible. All right, which means you have to do specific things. Now, the reality is that you can write an incredible essay. You can write an incredible DBQ or an incredible history essay and still get a very, very low score. All right, because they don't care. The readers don't care about how great your essay is. If it doesn't meet the points of the DBQ that the rubric sets out, you're not gonna score highly. Okay, that's just the reality. Let's look a little bit. I'm gonna switch over and I want to look at the rubric in a little bit more detail. So you can find these rubrics. Okay, you can find these rubrics if you Google AP European History rubrics or AP History rubrics. If you're taking AP US History next year, congratulations, that you're going to be doing the exact same thing and you will already know how to do it, which is going to put you in a really, really good spot. But let's look here. So College Board hooks us up and puts it on a nice single page for us. But there are 7 total points that you can possibly get here. These are the 7 points that are up for grabs. So you get a point for your thesis or claim. You get a point for contextualization. You get a max of 3 points for the evidence that you use. You get 1 point for HIPP analyzing 3 of the documents. HIPP analyzing standing for historical situation, intended audience, point of view, and purpose. And then you get 1 point, and this is like the magical mystery point, for demonstrating complex understanding. We'll get to this point. I have thoughts about the complex understanding point, but let's start at the beginning and let's talk about this here. So first of all, I will say this right now. You need 100%, you need to memorize the AP European History DBQ rubric. You need to memorize the DBQ rubric. You cannot take this rubric into you, but you can certainly sketch out a rubric on your notes or on your test in the scratch paper. All right, you need to memorize this rubric because remember, this is a points game. You need to know the points that are up for grabs. So let's talk about thesis and claim. Thesis and claim should really, really be one of those points that you absolutely get. However, the big thing with thesis and claim is that you need to respond to the prompt with a historical defensible thesis or claim that establishes a line of reasoning. Effectively, what that means is that you actually answer the question. That you actually answer the question. So I'm going to give you an example here. Say the DBQ rubric, or say the DBQ question said something along the lines of, did population growth in Europe between the 1700s and 1800s have a positive or negative effect on Europe? If your thesis said that the population growth in Europe between the 1700s and 1800s had a positive impact on Europe, and that was your thesis, you would not get the thesis point because you didn't actually answer the question. All you did was take the question, switch some words around, and turn it into a statement. All right. Instead, what you would need to say is that the increase in population in Europe between the 17 and 1800s had a negative impact on Europe because of the increased populations of cities and the degradation of sanitation and living that occurred, in the cities or whatever. Okay. You need to actually answer the question with claims, right? You need to actually answer the question in a way that I could read your thesis and I know exactly what you're going to be talking about. If you just say that the population increase in Europe had a negative impact on Europe, I don't know what you're going to be talking about at all. I assume you're going to be talking about population, and I'm going to assume you're going to be talking about that it had a negative impact, but I don't really know what you're going to be talking about. You have to actually answer the question, okay? The thesis point should be one of these points that's a gimme point. You shouldn't have to worry about it. You should absolutely knock it out of the park, but you have to actually answer the question. Also, guys, if at any point you have questions, throw them in the chat and I'll answer them, okay? All right, point B. Part B, point number 2, contextualization. This, for some reason, students struggle getting the contextualization point. Students struggle getting the contextualization point. Contextualization, you are describing the things that are happening before or after the event that the prompt is referring to. So what does that actually mean? What I want to do is I want to look at an actual example here. I want to look at an actual example here. Where is my response question? Okay, so this is the DBQ that I had you guys look at, right? The 2017 DBQ, asking about the Glorious Revolution of 1688. So evaluate whether or not the Glorious Revolution of 1688 can be considered part of the Enlightenment. Let's think about this real quick. What could we talk about here to get the contextualization point? What could we talk about here to get the contextualization point? What do we think? There's a few different things. So what I would look at, so Addie, you said the Protestant Reformation in England. The Protestant Reformation absolutely relates to the Glorious Revolution. However, it is a little bit too far out of the time period. I would say the English Civil War is probably what you would want to be referencing here. James II, how he was determined to flip into a Catholic country, and since he was a Protestant country, it wasn't in favor, so he fled. What I would say, so Ariana, I definitely think, you know, that is explaining the Glorious Revolution. What I would do is I would give kind of even, I would step back a little bit further. I would explain why, you know, why England was a Protestant country to begin with. I would really caution you to just explain the Protestant Reformation, because that's not directly tying it to the Glorious Revolution, right? I would say you could explain the Protestant Reformation and then talk about how the Parliament wanted to maintain Protestantism within England, but I think referencing the English Civil War would be a little bit better bet when talking about contextualization. Kind of my rule of thumb when it comes to contextualization is you want to have it within the 100-year time period. Okay, you want to have it within the 100-year time period. 100 years before or 100 years after. 100 years before or 100 years after. All right, and so we can actually look. Let me pull up the 2017 scoring guidelines. So the scoring guidelines are also something that you have access to, and I really recommend them here. Okay. So with where's Kentucky? Yeah, okay. So right here with contextualization. So these are kind of all of the different things that College Board says that you can talk about. And they said these are commonly seen examples, right? So these aren't all of the things you could talk about. They're commonly seen examples of what you could get contextualization for this, right? Protestant Reformation, but which define the underlying religious tensions in the 17th century Britain, how the English Civil War and Stuart Restoration set up religious or political conflicts. Thinkers such as Descartes, Spinoza, and Hobbes increasingly applied principles of empiricism and skepticism to analyze politics. So I would really say that if you're going to talk about Protestant Reformation, remember, you got to connect, right? You got to connect it to the Glorious Revolution. That's kind of the big thing. So the issue that I think a lot of students run into when it comes to contextualization, when it comes to getting this contextualization point, is they really struggle with actually connecting it to the event that the DBQ is talking about. right? Because while we absolutely could talk about Protestant Reformation, we have to connect it to the Glorious Revolution. While we want to talk about the English Civil War, we got to connect it to the Glorious Revolution. Okay, the English Civil War was, you know, a civil war between Parliament and the monarchy. And if you just ended there, right? If you were explaining the context of the Glorious Revolution and you said the English Civil War was a conflict between the monarchy and Parliament that resulted in, you know, Charles I getting his head chopped off, and you ended your contextualization right there, you wouldn't get the point, because then you need to relate that to the Glorious Revolution. You need to say, you know, the English Civil War was yada yada yada. This increased tensions between Parliament and the monarchy, right? You can even take it further and say that when James II threatened to disrupt religious stability in England, Parliament worked to remove him from power, right? That's pretty good contextualization. It gives you the context of the Glorious Revolution pretty handedly. The big thing with contextualization, you have to connect the events you talk about and the events that the DBQ is talking about. Connect them together, okay? All right, let's keep looking at the rubric here. All right, so for evidence, you have 3 total points that you can get for evidence. Okay, the first point is that if you use the content of at least 3 documents to address the topic of the prompt, you get at least 1 point. Everybody should at least be getting this point, right? If you use 3 documents, you are good to, you've got that 1 point, right? You've got that 1 point. But you get a second point if you not only use at least 3 documents, but you actually actively use or support an argument in response to the prompt using at least 6 documents. Okay, so if you just mention 3 documents when you're answering the DBQ question, you'll get a point. However, you'll get another point if you actively use 6 documents to argue for your thesis. All right, this can be really, really tricky to do, and we'll talk more about that in a second. Okay, then this third evidence point is a piece of historical evidence that is found from beyond the documents. All right, so if none of the documents mention, we'll say, if none of the documents mention a specific enlightened thinker, and you talk about that enlightened thinker in regards to the Glorious Revolution, that's a piece of outside evidence, right? Your piece of outside evidence can go anywhere, but I recommend it being within the body paragraphs, mostly because you really want to be careful. It says relevant to an argument about the prompt, right? So you have to use it to support your argument. So that tells me that it needs to be within the body paragraphs, right? Okay, and we'll return back to these, I promise. We'll return back to the evidence in a second, I promise. The last 2 points, though. For at least 3 documents, you explain how or why the document's point of view, purpose, historical situation, and or audience is relevant to an argument, okay? So if you're explaining, you know, if you're using a document to support your argument, and then you explain, you know, the point of view, the purpose, the historical situation, or the audience, and how that impacted the actual content of the document itself, you'll get that will count towards one of your 3 documents to get this point, right? So you only need to HIPP analyze for 3 documents, right? But you have to do it, you know, you have to do one of these, you know, one of these historical situation, intended audience, point of view, purpose, right? You don't have to do all of them, but you do have to do at least one of these 4. We'll come back to HIPP here in a second as well. HIPP can be also, like, the wording of how HIPP works is a little confusing, but we'll talk more about that here in a second. Then lastly, the complex understanding point, which is the worst point on any rubric and any AP exam, IMO. Demonstrate a complex understanding of the historical development that is the focus of the prompt, using evidence to corroborate, qualify, or modify an argument to address the question. This is Very, very subjective. It's going to depend on who is grading your DBQ, whether you get this or not. And this is the big issue with this point. It is a subjective point. It depends on who reads it. So what I'm going to tell you is that this is your bonus point. If you get the complex understanding point, high five, awesome. If you don't, it is not the end of the world. Okay, if you get a 6 out of 7, that is still an A, right? That is still an insane score on the DBQ. All right, do not beat yourself up trying to get the complex understanding point. All right, it's a subjective point. It's a bad point, in my opinion. I wouldn't worry about it all that much. All right, so that's the rubric. Now, the big question is, how do you actually analyze? How do you actually analyze all of these sources, right? How do you actually analyze all of these sources? Let's talk about it. So, kind of recap, there's a total of 7 sources, with at least one of them being a visual source of some kind. It'll probably be a piece of art, it could be a graph, whatever, be a visual source. You need to support your argument using at least 6 of the documents, 6 other sources. You also need to HIPP analyze at least 3 of the documents. Now, what I always recommend is, as soon as you crack open the DBQ, you want to first and foremost read the prompt, of course, read the prompt, see what you're going to be talking about, and then just do a single once over of all the documents. Read through all the documents, okay? They're going to be pretty short, like a paragraph long. They're not going to give you this document that's like a page and a half long. Read through all the documents and then group them into at least 2 groups, maybe 3. All of the documents are going to be able to be put into groups. Typically with these questions, there's going to be like whether you support the question or you're against the question, right? So I'll use the example of we'll use the example that we have right now, with the Glorious Revolution. Can we consider the Glorious Revolution to be part of the Enlightenment? Well, half the documents are probably going to say that it can be part of the Enlightenment, and the other half are probably gonna maybe have arguments against that. Okay, it won't always be a 50-50 split. Sometimes it's going to be 60-40, but organize and group as best as you can the documents into at least 2 different groups. Okay, this is really going to help you when you go to construct your thesis, right? Because if the documents are all, if you're reading the documents and they're talking about how the Glorious Revolution, which these documents do, some of these documents do, that the Glorious Revolution was really focused more so on keeping religious stability in Europe, then your argument might be that the Glorious Revolution cannot be considered part of the Enlightenment because it was more focused on keeping religious stability as opposed to disposing of a corrupt or oppressive monarch, right? That thesis answers the question perfectly, and you're able to get that information from the documents that you read, right? So group the documents into at least 2 groups, all right? That's also going to really, really help when you're planning out your DBQ. You'll be able to sort of slot in the documents to the different parts of your DBQ. Now, I wish I could tell you there was a magic formula for analyzing documents. I wish I could tell you that there was some neat little trick that you could do that's going to make it better and easier. The reality is it is practice, practice, practice. You just got to practice. Okay. What I have heard, kind of the advice that I've gotten from other AP teachers, is that the best way to do it is to maybe get with a buddy and get a set of documents and individually analyze the documents and try to pull out the main ideas and then compare notes. Okay. Another thing that you can do, you can use the documents, the DBQs that are posted on the College Board website, the past DBQs, analyze the documents, and then see how close they match up with the actual description of the documents that College Board posted, right? And then also another thing you can do is use the test prep books. Don't worry about writing the DBQ, just analyze the documents and see how close you actually got to it, okay? But you just got to practice. All right, Ariana, if you would explain in your thesis that it is part of the Enlightenment because England adopted a Bill of Rights because it shows Enlightenment ideas but limiting power and protecting citizen power. Yeah, absolutely, right? So like mentioning how they adopted a Bill of Rights, absolutely, right? And then that would be a thesis that actually answers the question, because you're going further than just saying it was part of the Enlightenment. You actually explained how it was part of the Enlightenment, right? Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I mean, the biggest thing, guys, is practice, 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 right? Absolutely practice, 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 right? That's the best way to do these things, okay? It's also going to make you faster, right? It's also going to make you faster. It's going to make you a faster reader. It's going to make you a faster writer if you just practice analyzing the documents. Like I said, I wish that there was an easier way to do it. I wish there was like some magical secret I had, but I don't. Just practice, guys. All right, we are running short on time. So, one of the really tricky things that can be that you have to do is you have to not only use 6 documents in your argument, but you actually have to actively use them to support your argument. Okay, you have to actually actively use them to support your argument. You can't just describe them. The thing I always say is that you're not giving a book report on the documents. This is the most common mistake I see when I see people writing a DBQ, is they just give descriptions of all of 6 of the documents and they feel like they did their job. The reality is that you need to actually actively use your documents here. Okay. So we can kind of look at an example here. This is an example from the DBQ. Thomas, would about a constitutional government be acceptable? Yeah, for sure. I mean, that falls into the Bill of Rights, right? So if you were to say that they established a constitutional government, then yeah, I mean, because we know that's part of the Enlightenment, right? And then Voltaire right here in document 6, he's going to talk about a constitutional government. So this is one of the documents from that DBQ, right? Voltaire, right? So the first thing we want to do when we get these documents, we want to source it. Who wrote it? What is it? When was it written? So Voltaire, French writer, Letter on the English People, 1726 to 1729. So, in this, and lack of time, we're not gonna we're not gonna read it together, but in this, Voltaire talks about this fact that in the English are able to limit the power of their kings, right? Here he said the English have doubtless purchased their liberties at a very high price and waded through a sea of blood to drown the idol of arbitrary power. Other nations have been involved in as great calamities and have shed as much blood. Within the blood these other nations spilt in defense of their liberties only enslaved them more. Right? So saying that the English do a really good job of limiting the power of the monarchy. So, this document written by Voltaire talking about the English government. If you were to say that the glorious revolution was part of the Enlightenment because the English Parliament limited the power of the king by issuing the Bill of Rights, right? If that's your claim, you can then say, according to Voltaire, one of the things that made the English so successful is that they were able to successfully limit the power of their government. Right? That would be actively using the source, right? That would be actively using the source. Okay. You want to make sure that the source itself is not just thrown in there, that it's actively giving some stability to whatever claim you are giving. Okay. So in this situation, like I said, if you were to say that that the Glorious Revolution was part of the Enlightenment because the English Parliament overthrew James II and established the Bill of Rights, to back up that claim, you would say, according to Voltaire, this act of limiting the power of the monarchy is crucial to what makes England so successful. Then you would want to say something along the lines of Voltaire, a prominent enlightened thinker, agreed that the act of limiting the power of the government was part of the goal of enlightened philosophers outside of England. Okay. I know that was me rambling a little bit, but the reality is that you need to actively use these to support your argument. These are not just things that you just throw in there. Okay. Like, you don't want to just say that Voltaire believed that England was able to limit the power of their kings and monarchies by wading through the seas of blood and drown the idol of arbitrary power. Right? If you were to just say that in your DBQ, you wouldn't get the point for it because it doesn't actively support any claim that you make. Right? All right, we are running very low on time, so I realize I'm moving fast here. But I want to quickly talk about HIPP. All right, so you get a point if you HIPP analyze at least 3 sources. HIPP stands for historical context, intended audience, purpose, and point of view. So, for example, with Voltaire, right? If you were to say Voltaire, a prominent enlightened thinker who supported and liked the English style of limited government, yada yada yada, right? That would be HIPP analyzing, right? You explain who Voltaire is, you explain who his point of view is. So you would have HIPP analyzed at that point, right? Voltaire, who is probably writing to other French enlightened thinkers about how the English have successfully set up their government, supports the idea that the Glorious Revolution and the establishment of the Bill of Rights was an Enlightenment goal or whatever, right? That would be HIPP analyzing, okay? With 3 of the documents, you need to talk about point of view, purpose, intended audience, or historical context. You don't need to do all 4, just pick one. With 3 of the documents, and actually tie it into like the relevancy of your argument itself. Okay. All right. I know that we're moving really quick here. I know that I've been rambling a lot. This is something we're going to talk. We're going to spend at least an hour and a half on the DBQ during the Cram session, or the Cram finale. We'll actually go through and write one together, from scratch. I'll have a Google Doc up and we'll type one out together. But I want to talk real quick about managing time, something that I have not done very well tonight. When managing time, this is kind of how I recommend that you manage your time on the DBQ. You have 60 minutes to read, plan, and write. That is not a lot of time. I recommend, 1, being very vigilant with your time. Know how much time you have left, right? Spend 10 minutes reading through all the documents and grouping them. Then spend another 5 to 10 minutes drawing out an outline that also includes what documents you'll talk about when. All right, so actually say, body paragraph 1, this is what I'm going to be talking about. These are the documents I'm going to be using. Then 40 to 45 minutes to actually write. Okay, you do this and you've set yourself up for success. Okay, you've given yourself a lot of time to plan things out. I highly recommend outlining. Outlining is just like the best way to make sure that you're not scrambling. At the end of your second your second body paragraph, you're trying to fit in 4 sources because you forgot to include them. You outline, you're not going to run into that issue. All right. Now, obviously, we don't have time to go through this together. We are going to do a full practice DBQ on the during the Cram finale. I promise we're going to do it. Okay, I promise. But these are my final thoughts. Okay, you got to play for points with the DBQ. Make sure you know the rubric and you know it well. Manage your time. Don't lose track of the hour. Read each document carefully and think about how it relates and answers the question. Make sure to argue with the documents. Do not just give a book report on them. And lastly, practice, practice, practice. Okay? Practice, practice, practice. Those are my kind of 5 tips that I think are the best measures for success on the DBQ. All right. Discord. Charlie's going to be in there. Go ask questions. Okay, Charlie is an insane resource. I am, you know, super thankful to have such support here. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Thanks for answering questions. I am absolutely drained. It's way past my bedtime. So I appreciate you guys, especially my East Coasters who stayed up a little bit late. But ask questions in the Discord. I'll be in there to answer them as well. Charlie will be in there to answer them as well. And I will see you guys in a little over a week. We're gonna be doing LEQ, and then we're on to the Cram finale, and then that's it. Okay. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. Thank you Fiveable for having us all here together today, and I will see you guys later.